837 Big 550 KTRS. Good morning. David Stokes from the Show Me Institute.
Good morning, McGraw-Millhaven. From KTRS Radio.
You got it. David Stokes, you join us every Monday to talk about certain issues, and an interesting story came out yesterday, and that is the Francis Howell School District said, hey, we no longer have to take the kids from the Normandy School District. Great. Fantastic. So they said, do not bother coming back this next year. We don't have to take you. We're not going to take you.
Well, this is unfortunate. Just at the end of last week, when I was a special guest on the program, we were talking about how we were hoping, even though the state had allowed districts to reject students, we were hoping that at a minimum, the students already enrolled would be allowed to return.
Right.
But that is apparently not going to take place in Francis Howell District, and it remains to be seen whether a lot of other districts will make that same choice. Now, in the case of Francis Howell, because they'd removed the fact that the government was going to provide for transportation, I think a lot of those students were going to have trouble getting out there anyway.
Right.
But we will see, especially the districts closer to Riverview Gardens in Normandy in St. Louis County, where with or without transportation, the kids can't get there in their pursuit of a better education, which is what this all comes down to in the end. This is nothing more than children pursuing a better education, and it remains to be seen how many districts are going to allow them to do that.
I don't know the answer to any of this, but I do know that these poor students are being failed by the region, right? I mean, we are failing these students in the Normandy School District.
Absolutely. And we made after a long court case where some plaintiffs and their attorneys got the state to enforce its own law allowing these transfers. We did it for 1 year, and I think we made things better for the students who chose to transfer and for the students who stayed behind with smaller class sizes and the like. And now we're just backtracking. And as much as the state, I think, has a right to set some of these limits, like the $7,500 approximately max that they'll pay for a transfer to go to a different district, I think the rules that you had to be in public school for about a year before the transfer program, so they're not allowing anybody who moves into a district or anybody who was in private school but lived in the district to participate, and now allowing school districts to opt out completely. I think we're backtracking way too far and really harming these kids who are, again, want nothing more than to get a decent education.
Forgetting for a moment that they passed the law saying that if you're in a failed school district, you can transfer to an adjoining school district. And they fought that. That's the law they passed. And then they spent 10 years trying to ask the courts to say that that's unconstitutional for a law they passed, right? I mean, if you didn't like the law, don't pass the law. So every time the courts were like, you're crazy, the law says this, they can. So then they finally transfer. Now they're in this no man's land where they're sort of just making up things, right? They aren't passing any laws. They're just sort of arbitrarily deciding this as some accreditation, and then they got some of this, and maybe they got a law over here and a law over there, and Nixon rejects it and vetoes it over here, but they're still sort of figuring it all out. Forget all of that for a second. The students that transferred out and into the Francis Howell School District, even though it was last minute, seemed to do pretty well, and the school that received the kids didn't seem to have any problems, right? So it actually worked. Outside of the money and the logistics, it was a very successful year just in terms of academics.
The predictions of disasters, the predictions of chaos didn't come true in any of these school districts that took the kids.
Right.
And if we all recall, a year ago in the summertime when this first came down, there were plenty of those. Oh, this is going to be a nightmare. How will it ever come through? But people worked it out, as people are wont to do when you present a challenge and say, all right, make this work. And it did work. It worked for the kids who transferred. I think it worked for the kids who stayed behind as well. And now we're just moving backwards. And the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is able to set these rules all on its own. They don't have laws backing this up, but they can just do it because, you know, who's going to challenge them? The first court case, which was nothing more than interpreting the plain language of a statute,
right,
took almost a decade to litigate. So who's gonna sue over one of these regulations to enforce it now? They'll answer it, 7 years from now, and the kids are all
right.
The kids in that family are all grown up and out of school anyway. It's unfortunate, and my colleague James Scholes, who's a friend of this show as well, he's got a lot of great writings up on it at showmeinstitute.org and showmedaily.org that if your listeners want more info, I'd encourage them to check that out.
Okay, now let's talk about the rules being changed. The state House and Senate passes a law, the only law that has been passed since this. It was vetoed by the governor, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's been no new laws
Correct.
that have been enacted. And yet this DESE, this Department of Education, is changing the laws. They're just making them up now, right? They've decided that they've taken over the Normandy School District, which means they're no longer unaccredited. So they've just sort of decided that they're not fully accredited, but they're not unaccredited. So there's some little like, don't worry about it, we'll just take care of you. Which means now these parents who fought this law that says if I'm in an unaccredited school district, I can get out and find a better district for my kid. They've just basically said that law doesn't exist because we've deemed it. You can't be unaccredited. Why? Because we've just told you so.
They've taken it over. They've made these changes. Equally troubling is the changes that you had to have been in the school district for a certain amount of time to participate in
Which is a made-up rule.
Which is a made-up rule. Or that if you lived in the district for that period of time, but sent your kids to private school, you're not allowed to participate in the program, which for both of these examples, these people are taxpayers in the district.
Right.
I mean, if they sent their kids to private school, they still paid their taxes to Normandy or Riverview Gardens. So the idea that they're excluded from the program, I think, would be on very shaky legal grounds. But again, who has 6 or 7 years to challenge it?
Could you imagine if this were happening in Ladue? Could you imagine if they just arbitrarily decide that your kids in a failing school district just can't go to another school because we've just decided some regulator somewhere just changed the rules? I mean, there would be a march on the Capitol. But because these people in Normandy, who are not the upper crust, who are working class citizens, we are failing them miserably, and no one can do anything about it. I mean, it's so convoluted. It's so hard to follow A, B, C, D, E, and F that it's not a simple rallying cry. But if people were to actually know what's going on, we are failing these people like I've never seen a government fail a part of town before.
It just gets back to, in the end, whether you support options in education, whatever it is, all that we're doing now is enforcing the law a year ago. It worked. It helped kids get a better education, and now they're backtracking on it substantially, perhaps completely. If all the districts just say, no, we don't have to take them, we're not going to take them,
right,
then you're back to exactly where you were, to square one a year ago, where all these kids were in a failing school district. And again, it's nothing more than parents and children trying to get a better education. And you know what? We can argue about what type of social welfare, what type of needs should be provided, what works. We know that really the only thing that works to help poor children is a good education. That's what's going to help them expand and grow and be economically productive and be great citizens. A good education as children is the key. And here we are, preventing families who want nothing more than to attain that.
Well, and it's nothing more than doing everything they can not to follow the law. No law has been changed. And every court has said if you're from an unaccredited school district, you can transfer out. They haven't changed that. They've just regulated it out of existence.
Well, and that's what regulators are wanting to do. And we could talk about this issue for hours. The fact that at every level of government, we've given way too much authority for regulators to interpret laws, expand their own power. We see that with hair braiding and taxi cab licensing, right, too. But let's stay focused on education. But this is a classic example of the regulators doing things the legislature should be doing. Now, if you're opposed to what the legislature did, well, then change the law. Don't just leave it up to regulators to make so many changes to make the prior law moot and punish all these children and their families who were doing nothing more than following the law and paying taxes to their existing district beforehand.
Yeah, no, it's this one is This one is so sad. And these kids now are being total pawns in this. Last year, last second, okay, transfer out of the school district you're in, go drive to Francis Howell. You get settled in there, you meet some friends, you get the system down. Now this year, now you have to go back to this other school in which you left, which we said last year was so bad you don't have to go to. Now that school is no better, but now you must go back to the school you didn't have to go to last year.
It's so troubling, and it's going to be very interesting to see in these coming weeks what the school districts that surround Normandy and Riverview Gardens, such as Ferguson, Florissant, and University City, where these children can get to, even their transportation costs aren't going to be covered, but they can get there.
Yeah.
And what these districts are going to choose to do, because some of them, I believe, do have room to accept large numbers of students, or at least somewhat sizable numbers of students.
Yeah.
And it's going to be very interesting to see if they just flat out reject it as well, which I think would be a disaster for these families.
Francis Howell says no to the Normandy students from a year ago who went there. David Stokes, when can we read you? When can we see you?
We have, my colleague James Schulz has a lot of great writing, great case studies and other writing on educational issues at showmeinstitute.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
Thanks.
Thanks, McGraw.
8:48, traffic weather straight ahead.